Hello, world. Welcome to the Speed Strength Show. I'm Braden.
I'm Tommy. And the imperial system or the metric system?
Oh, metric for sure, for sure.
Hey, I'm on board with you.
But
And
last I checked, like 30% of our listeners are in the States, though. So this could be controversial.
I mean, that's all right. The reason I bring it up is because this has been the culture shock I've dealt with being in Windsor. Is it's
Mm-hmm.
Canadian, but everyone uses the imperial system.
Well, you're right on the border. So,
I know. And so, but it drives me nuts when we're talking about, like, especially now we're in winter, like it's a little bit chillier and we're in a shutdown. So then you have a conversation about, well, can we go outside? Can we get some of the kids to go out? And they're like, oh, it's, might be a little cold today. It's 42 degrees. I'm like, it's not 42 degrees. It's -5. Like, or I
yeah.
don't even know what it directly works to, but like, as soon as I hear, oh, it's 35 or it's 45, I think sweltering hot.
Yeah.
But they're
Oh,
all
yeah.
running with the imperial system here
Mm-hmm.
and using Fahrenheit, which I don't even know. All I know is I think 68 degrees Fahrenheit is 20 degrees Celsius. After that, no idea.
I think the one that I know, I think 32 is zero.
Oh, is that what zero is?
I think so.
I don't even know, to be
I'm
honest.
I'm not certain, but I'm I'm confident. But yeah, that's Fahrenheit is the one that makes the least sense to me of all of them, I think. Like, what is it in reference to? Like
Well, they
it's
don't even
just
have a mutual 0 point.
that's what I mean. Like,
I mean, I
like
guess other than absolute zero, which is like what, minus 273 kelvins or whatever. No one even
yeah,
uses kelvins. That's like a science lab thing that people do.
yeah, exactly. But I don't know. Like it's so like the metric system where like we use a lot of the imperial system based off of habit. Like recipes are in cups and ounces and whatnot.
Yeah.
And like height is in feet and inches. Centimeters is fine, but people
Our
just don't
driver's
really
license are in centimeters.
centimeters. Yep, that's right. Um, but yeah, like the metric system just makes so much sense
Oh, it's so
because
nice. It's so
it's
nice.
like
That's what I try to tell everyone here.
not only is it like it's based on tens, which is so much easier to do math and to count.
Just move the decimal. Done.
Um, but yeah, like 0 degrees Celsius is when water freezes. 100 degrees Celsius is when water boils. Even just like a kilogram is the weight of 1 liter of water. Like it's all just based off of how water works, which is like the most ubiquitous thing, you
It's
know.
everywhere. It's
Yeah, well, and
everything.
and maybe it's because like in Canada we have a lot of water, and where this all started in Britain, you're surrounded by water, so like maybe that's part of it. But
It's just more intuitive. Like you said, it's all in tens. It's easy to do the math.
mhm.
Like anyone who's like, oh, yeah, it's easy with imperial math. No, it's not. Like it's easy if you have a calculator in front of you. And I get that everyone now has a calculator on their phone and whatever. But like
You still have to remember all the conversions.
you still have to remember all the conversions where for the metric system, you don't. And I don't even need to take out my phone and get the calculator and figure out whatever. I just move the decimal place over. I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
that's 1,000 meters or a kilometer. You can roll with either because it's
yeah,
so easy to do the math.
it's so strange to me. Like just like all the conversions, it seems so random.
it,
Like
it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any
12,
sense. It's just, and I get maybe if you grew up with it and it's all you know, then it makes sense because it's all you know. But it doesn't click with my brain. It doesn't register.
well, yeah, it's like it doesn't seem like there's rules. It seemed like there's just like one time one person came up with something and they're like, yeah, we'll throw that in too. We don't have one for volume, so we'll throw that in.
If the imperial system was a language, it'd be English.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah,
It
like
makes sense because it's all we know, but it doesn't make sense.
if that's not where you come from.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's not even like intuitive, and so that's I only bring it up. Like, man, I'm loving being in Windsor. I'm with a good group of people, but man, the imperial system is driving me bonkers. It's driving me nuts.
Yeah.
Like I can't. Oh, and I've
Just
never
like
had to deal with that before
yeah.
because I've
Yeah,
always
for
been
sure.
far enough away from the border that you know the metric system is what we roll with.
Yeah. Yeah, just the whole like 12 inches is a foot, 3 feet is a yard. It's like 1,600 something yards is a mile.
I think, oh, it's what is it? 1609, I think.
Sure.
1609, I think. Or
Why is
no,
it that?
or
You
is
know?
it, sorry, I think it's 1609 meters is a
Oh, okay.
1 mile, because if you do 4 laps around the track, I know this from track. That's what it is. 1609 meters. Because if you go to if you go to any track, there's a random like sloped or curved line about 9 meters back from the finish line. That's the 1 mile start line,
Oh, okay.
because 4 laps around the track is 1600 meters, which is technically like 9 point whatever meters short of a 1 mile.
Yeah,
And
because
in the States, they run the 1 mile race. So all
right.
the tracks get.
Yeah, interesting. Well, there you go. Yeah. And then a yard is basically like 0.9 meters or something like that. So it would be
Yeah,
like
because
17 or 18 or something.
11 yards. Again, these are the only conversions I know because of track and field. Because when you have to try to
Yeah.
mix things over, I think it's 11 yards is 10 meters.
Yeah. So that sounds about right. So yeah, it's very strange.
But I'd rather
Very
just stick to the
strange.
metric system, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean it makes so much more sense. But it's weird too. Like it's weird that so much of our cooking stuff is imperial too, though.
Well, yeah, and
Like
the Canadian Football League plays in yards.
which I think makes sense because it's based off of American football.
But it's our only pro sport. It's our only like actual pro sport that's only Canada.
Is lacrosse not mostly Canada?
Well, no, but they still have teams in the States. So
That's
it's a
true.
league that's shared. I
Well,
guess
I
we
mean,
technically, there's a basketball league now.
yes, there is. That's
And I'm
right.
sure there's some others out there, but for the longest time of like major sports on television,
Yeah.
the CFL was the only one that was all Canadian teams
Yeah.
in this country, didn't share anything with the States, and they
Right.
use yards.
Yeah.
We should
Yeah.
have used
Yeah.
a football field measured in meters just to be different, just to show that the
Yeah.
metric system was better.
What's interesting too is it because if it's 110 yards, if we had it 100 meters, that would be like pretty much the same.
Well, it would be. So
Yeah.
goal line to goal line on a Canadian football field is 100 meters,
Yeah. That's so that's so funny. Oh
but on an
man.
American football field, I guess would be what, like 89 meters or
Yeah, it's like 89 or 90, something like that.
yeah.
And then
So
we could have 3 downs to get a 10 meter. Yeah, 10 meters for a first down.
or we go three, you get 3 downs to go 9 meters.
Well, no, it would still work because then there's like 10. You split the field into 10. But now I guess we have the field split into 11.
Well, no, because it's 100 meters, so you could split it into.
Well, you would, but like now it's like 11 chunks of 10
Oh,
yards
yeah, I see what you're
instead
saying.
of 10 chunks of 10 meters. But yeah,
Well, you heard it here. I think the CFL should move to meters.
that'd be good. How
That
about that?
receiver had 1,200 meters of receiving this year.
Your stats wouldn't be as impressive.
No, because they would be less.
Yeah. It's like when you lift in kilos versus pounds.
Oh yeah, pounds is way better because
Yeah.
the numbers are bigger. But yeah,
A little while ago, we were in Ajax and I don't remember who put it in, but we were having like a lasagna or something, and it was the noodles were different. The noodles said like you had to bake it at it was like 200 or 250 or something, because and
what was it in
nope,
Celsius? You mean?
it was in Celsius.
Okay,
Nobody thought to check, so they put it in, and it was supposed to be like 40 minutes, and then they
it's like
checked, and it was like it's not really done at all. And I'm like, 40 minutes at 250 seems really low.
it does.
And then like looked at the package and was like, of course it's in Celsius. So we got what's that? 450. Okay, crank it up. You know, so weird. But yeah, I don't know where the noodles must have been from the UK or something.
Or from Italy or somewhere in Europe where they
Yeah.
use the metric system, and then they weren't going to put their oven in Fahrenheit because their oven was probably in Celsius.
Yeah. Yeah. Very strange. It does make it confusing to switch back and forth. But
Well, especially for us because we're kind of in the middle.
well, yeah, especially for you. You're right. Literally.
Oh no,
on the
people
edge.
here are just straight imperial system.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But I mean, as a country, because we're so influenced by the States, but
Yeah.
we're on a metric system. So like you said, how much do you weigh? No one says kilos here. Everyone talks about being their weight or their mass in pounds.
Yeah.
But how far is the grocery store? Oh, it's 5 kilometers down the road. We would never say it's like 3 miles or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, that's true.
So it's just, we're like a mishmash of this imperial metric.
You know, it was interesting too. When we were in, when we were in Scotland, so I don't remember what, like England and around London was like, but
Yeah.
when we were in Inverness, for sure, the speeds on the road were miles.
Really?
Yeah. And
I bet you
I,
Scotland did that just to be different from England.
but I think
Guarantee
London,
that's why they did it.
I think London was the same, if I remember
Oh, was
correctly.
it?
I think so. But like, why is that? That
But
doesn't make
London also,
sense.
like, sorry, not London. The UK drives on the other side of the road,
Yes.
as where the rest of Europe does not.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, who knows? That's a whole nother. What side
I
of the
know,
road
man.
should you drive on? That's a whole nother opener.
Yeah. It doesn't, none of it makes any sense. But, you just, I guess you learn one and you stick with it.
That's what I'm trying to do. I
Mhm.
really was. And then I got here. Now I'm going to have to relearn the imperial system.
Yeah. But anyway, I mean, the point of this podcast is to not stick to the one we know. It's to learn a bunch of stuff.
That's right. So I'm better for it.
Yeah, that's right. And this was one that we didn't want to learn anything about, or well,
I
I
didn't
wanted to
even want
learn.
to do this one, to be
Yeah,
honest.
you wanted to push it away.
I was down to do any other topic but the aerobic system.
Yeah.
But here we are. You pulled me in.
Yeah.
And now I'm happy I'm here.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a good time, and we're excited to cap off the journey with part 3,
You bet.
where we get a little bit more concrete. Well, concrete and abstract in the same sense, I suppose.
Yeah.
Because we spent the last few episodes talking about like why it's important, what it does, like some of the adaptations that you can hope to achieve. And then now we're going to talk about obviously potential training applications, which seem like they would be pretty good, but also maybe have never been done, or we haven't heard of them being done or not. So,
Yeah, a little more practical, a little more applied.
yeah.
Like, let's actually, can you go out and get your hands dirty with this stuff? Either, train your athletes with these methods, or I don't know, doing some of it yourself. As we highlighted in the first one, probably should be doing some. Everyone should be doing a little bit of this.
A little bit, at least. Yeah.
So yeah, a little more practical today, a little more applied. Hopefully people have ideas taken away now from this that they can actually use in their day-to-day coaching and training and things like that.
So yeah, where did you want to start with this one? Because you had some ideas too.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the place to start here is just, and I mentioned it a little bit in part 2, where it's not that difficult to train the aerobic system.
No, I mean, it's like anything else. Like there's everything trains everything. There's some ways to get a little bit more specific with it.
Yeah, no. But what I mean by that is that it's a quality where you can see a tremendous improvement, right? You might not be able to make everybody jump out of the gym. You might not be able to make everyone super, super fast, but everyone can have a pretty reasonable level of fitness. And so in terms of like bang for buck, in terms of improving somebody's ability on the aerobic end, it's a very trainable system, and it's a very resilient system, as we talked about. You can make adaptation and you can hold on to that adaptation really, really well. And with some of the papers we were talking about, some of the studies we highlighted, you can get out there once a week and do something aerobic and start to see improvements. You go for a jog on one day, and the next week you go for a jog and it probably feels a little easier. And the week after that, it's a little easier, and so on and so forth. And you can create a lot of adaptation. So I think that's one of the big things I try to think about, and this has reminded me of it doing this series, is that it's a very trainable quality, and it doesn't have to be the be all and end all of your training. Especially on the speed power side, we can still get out once a week and do some aerobic stuff, and we can get better and we can stay fit And it doesn't need to be like, oh, we need to put speed stuff on pause or strength stuff on pause or ignore those things because we need to do 4 days of aerobic training a week. And so I think that's maybe a place to start, is that it's a very flexible thing that you can work into your training, regardless of what sport, regardless of if you're playing a sport or not, regardless of what level you're at.
Yeah, for sure. It can be very flexible, and especially like if you don't do that much, it doesn't take that much to like get an adaptation. Like you said, going out once a week for 20 minutes, that's fine. That'll be enough. And then like going out once you've built up some of it, like continuing to go out once a week or every other week or every,
Yeah.
3 or 4 weeks, whatever, it'll be
Or the
enough.
volume doesn't even need to be as high, or the intensity doesn't need to be
No,
as
and
much. You
assuming,
can,
yeah, and if you are playing a sport, assuming there is a reasonable level of aerobic requirements in your sport, like practice will probably be enough, or games will probably be enough to maintain what you've built. So that was my thought too. Like if it's an important thing for your sport, then you might want to dedicate some time early in the off season to develop it. But once you've developed it, you don't need to do much to maintain it. So it could be one of those things where, yeah, just like everyone wants to get in and like do volume work at the beginning of the off season or whatever, like build up your capacity. They could be good like in conjunction with that potentially. And then you don't need to do much to maintain it later on when you're trying to develop more of the speed power stuff as well.
well, and that's exactly it. So I think what I'm getting at is, we're both in the speed, power, strength realm of, most of the training and most of the athletes that we work with, is that there's really not an excuse for us to exclude it, simply because our coaching and our athletes live more on the anaerobic side. Because, like, let's be real, if I send a speed power athlete once a week to go do a 20 or 25-minute run, it's not going to take away from the other stuff that we're doing.
Yeah, not necessarily. Like it does depend. Like there is evidence to show that there is interference. There can be interference for sure. I
I
didn't.
think that's with big training blocks. If I was trying to really develop the aerobic system at the same time, I'm really trying to develop the anaerobic system.
Yeah, like the papers I came across didn't really seem to do it in a great way. I think it was the most reasonable one I found. Like and it was never comparing like speed development with aerobic development. It was comparing strength with aerobic development. Um, but the most reasonable one I found was like 2 days of strength, 2 days of running. So if you had, 4 days of strength with one easy day of running, like who's to say what that would look like? We don't like, I didn't find the research to show what that would look like, but it would be more reasonable theoretically. And then obviously, like if you have like a full strength program and you add running to that, it could be like, it's not going to be as good. And if you have a full like aerobic training program and you add strength to that, well, actually, I mean, that research shows it could be beneficial, but um, it needs to be set up a little bit more intelligently than some of the research tries to show anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, I can give an example here of, because it was like what the training blocks looked like for us. Like when I was competing at Waterloo, and we were on a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday schedule in terms of our training. And Monday, Thursday, Saturday were like, we moved fast.
Mhm.
There was blocks, there was speed stuff, there was like race modeling, and we lifted on all those days. So 3 big training days geared towards what I would say was the speed power side, Monday, Thursday, Saturday. That Tuesday session was always a pretty big aerobic session. We'd have a lot of volume or longer tempo runs and things like that. But you know what? You got your speed and lifting in on the Monday. You come in and hit a pretty big aerobic session on the Tuesday. You have Wednesday off. Now you're prepared to come back and hit some of the speed and the lifting you got on Thursday. Friday's off. You come back and do the same thing on Saturday. So that's an example to me where, like, yeah, so we had a dedicated day to building some of that aerobic development, and we needed it. Like, even, if we go back to that Gaston paper where they broke down the percentage of energy, where it came from in a given event, 10 seconds, which we had nobody on the team who could run 10 seconds flat in the 100, was a 94.6% split. So 6% of the energy was coming from the aerobic system. So now you look in the 200 meter where, the guys were running low, 21, 22 type range. And the ladies were running, 25, 26, 27. That number is going to be higher. It's maybe like 15%.
Yeah.
And now we were running the 4 as well in the 300. So we needed a certain level of aerobic development, but we didn't want to interfere with the speed. So that's an example of what I mean, where I think it's very flexible, where you can get a good aerobic session in once a week and not have it interfere with the other stuff, even if the name of your game is to sprint as fast as you can.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I get, it's a little bit different compared to something like powerlifting, where there is, you may not have people running the 300 or 400 where there's a little bit more aerobic, but we talked about all the other benefits that aerobic training brings to the table. So maybe it's not a big, heavy aerobic day like we had, but maybe it's even just going out for a 60-minute walk on one of your off days or something.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
so many ways that we can flexibly, I don't know if that's a word, but we can find space to put it into the training program. And I think that's the most important thing, because I'm biased towards this. I've been a little bit reluctant to try to either myself or for the athletes to try to put that stuff in there.
Yeah.
Because we are worried about it interfering with the speed power.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it certainly is going to depend on, the length of your activity, as you alluded to. And like the movement too, like if you're a sprinter and you're going for a jog, like it's not the same stride, but like you're working on a lot of the same things.
Well, heck, it could be on the bike or the elliptical. It doesn't even matter.
Well, exactly. And that's
you just need some sort of like blood flow and heart rate.
Yeah. But like, that's what I mean. Like if you're going for a jog as a sprinter, that can be valuable, like for refining the movement a little bit. And like, you're still like being springy and you're still being light,
there's still impact. Like, there's still, compared to like the bike where there's like
a lot
no
of the
impact
structural changes. Yeah. A lot of the structural changes are going to be similar, I think. And for powerlifting, like most of them would be pretty terrible at running, so I wouldn't do that. But like bike would be easier. Like going for a walk a few times a week is anybody can do that. That's not going to interfere with anything. But what I like too about looking into some of the interval stuff is you can get like those aerobic adaptations. You can get a little bit more of the like anaerobic, and still do things that are quite fast while still developing the aerobic system. And you can do it in a way that is a lot more tailored to like the types of activities you're doing and the times that you're doing, because there's just so much variability with like your work to rest ratios and like the lengths and the intensities that you can be working at. So that was one thought that I had too, like where you can start at the beginning of your off season doing more of like a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 rest to work ratio, 2-to-1 work to rest ratio.
more aerobic.
More aerobic
and less aerobic.
Transition to like 1-to-3, 1-to-5. If you're doing like actual sprint work, it's going to be like 1-to-10, 1-to-12.
It could be 1 to like 200.
Yeah. So, I think that kind of a transition makes some sense. And even like I wouldn't do super long work or rest intervals if you're going like with the 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, because if you do like a a 1 minute sprint, or even like longer, if you're doing like a 3-minute sprint to a 3-minute rest, like that 3 minutes is becoming quite like more like a jog, and then you're like really, really recovered by the end of 3 minutes anyway. So doing more like a 10-second or like a 20-second 10-second would keep it quite aerobic, and then you don't need to be super intense. And then you have a little bit more freedom when you get into like the 1-to-3, 1-to-5 range, where you can do stuff that's like 30 seconds long or a minute long or whatever. But working all up and down that spectrum, I think would be really valuable and a really easy way to transition from one into the other, and maintain throughout the off season.
Well, and that's exactly where like Joel Jameson's book, Ultimate MMA Conditioning, which don't get confused with the title. Yes, he works with fighters, he works with combat sport athletes, but the book is geared towards energy system development. And the ideas and the concepts can be taken from that and put into any sporting context, any environment, whatever. It's not, he provides specific examples of MMA, but your sport, you'd be able to figure out, how to use it. And he talks about the exact same thing about, starting with those, more aerobic style intervals, or maybe having more of them in earlier in the off season, and then transitioning towards more anaerobic work, later on. And, a lot of really different methods that would work well. One of the things I like about his book is that he doesn't just present like, hey, here's long, slow distance running. That's the only way you can start out. It's more the concept behind, well, you're doing continuous work at a very low intensity for a very long time. It doesn't have to be running. Or, aerobic intervals of, 1 minute on, 1 minute off type thing. Again, it doesn't have to be running or being on a bike or something like that. He offers, examples of doing that stuff with like med ball work. So then it stays a little bit more explosive, or there's faster movements, but from an interval standpoint, it still fits within an aerobic window, right? So maybe that's something better for a more dynamic athlete. So for example, a combat sport athlete, where whether they're in the first 30 seconds of the round or the last 30 seconds of the round, they still need to be moving around. And they're still moving in a relatively dynamic and fast fashion. So you could create a med ball circuit that still gets at the same thing that running would. You could create a strength circuit that still gets the same thing. So he was kind of peeling back some of the layers in the book, saying, hey, here's how the aerobic system, here's how the anaerobic systems work. And here are some of the time frames, here are some of the intervals, here are some of the outputs that are associated with that. So regardless of the modality or the method, you can still achieve that outcome. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things I love about that book, is that, yes, he uses a lot of MMA examples, but if you understand your sport and you understand training, it opens your mind to going like, yeah, I could create a strength circuit that creates aerobic adaptations. Mm-hmm. I could create a med ball circuit. I could create he uses the word plyo. Not all the exercises are necessarily plyo, in my opinion, as we know from the previous series, but where ground contacts are maybe a little bit faster, but it's lower intensity. There's so many different ways you can do it. And so again, it's a combat sport book, but I do really enjoy the content in that book because it gives you so many different options on how you can develop not just the aerobic system. I'm talking about that in this episode, but across the board. There's a number of different ways you can metabolically prepare your body for sport. Mm-hmm. And I would suggest everyone goes out and get a copy, or get a hold of a copy, read the book, take notes, do whatever, because it is a really, really good resource to have if you're like me and you don't really like the conditioning side of things, and it's not your favorite place to go read research and figure it out. That book was the perfect, oh, good, I don't need to go look at any of this stuff. I can borrow these ideas and be good to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really great point. That it's intuitive if you think about it, but there are a number of attributes to conditioning or interval work that you can modify. Like we talked about the work to rest ratio, the lengths of both of those intervals, the intensity of both of those intervals, and then the activity you're doing as well is a really, really great thing to keep in mind, that you can, and it doesn't have to be I find myself getting caught in the okay, if we're doing cardio, there's running, there's biking, there's elliptical, there's rowing. That's it, right? But no, you can do kettlebell swings. You're talking I remember there was one time where you were doing something akin to like interval work with the kettlebell, or
Oh
like
my,
it was
oh
your
my
like
God,
500
Dan
swings or
Johns.
whatever. Yeah.
Oh, that 10,000 kettlebell swing challenge. Yeah, you want to talk about aerobic? That was aerobic.
Yeah.
I was
But it's explosive
dying.
at the same time too, right?
Yeah. Now, was I swinging the kettlebell as violently as I would if I was just picking up a heavy kettlebell and doing 8 swings? Absolutely not. But like you said, there's still this like rhythmical,
Yeah.
explosive element. And that's, I don't know, have you read Ultimate MMA?
No, I haven't. I haven't,
Okay.
but I definitely should.
But it's nice how he lays it out, because he'll talk about, for example, like, the cardiac output method, or long slow distance method, or, you know, the lactic power method, or whatever. He breaks down all the different types of conditioning, but then he provides, like, here's what you could do as a strength circuit. Here's what you could do if you wanted to like move around. Here's some like med ball stuff, or jumping, or this or that. So
Mm.
again, like you said, it opens your mind a little bit to not thinking, oh, in order to do speed work, I have to just sprint. Or in order to do max strength, I can only lift heavy barbell weights. In order to do conditioning, I can only run. Like, it doesn't trap you into that thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's giving me ideas where, like, for example, on some of those off or lower intensity days, yeah, I've played around with providing my athletes with, a few tempo runs, and then you do some lighter kettlebell swings or a little med ball circuit that's
Mm-hmm.
a little bit snappier, still low intensity. And then we go back and do some more tempo runs. And then we come back to the med ball circuit. And then we go back to the
Mm-hmm.
tempo runs. So it's continuous. We're always moving, has that aerobic element, but it's not like slow and grindy where we're just
Yeah.
pounding the pavement and moving along. It feels a little bit more like I'm developing the aerobic system in a more responsible way based on what those
Mm.
athletes need.
Yeah. Well, and it's great too that, yeah, to keep that in mind, that you can really tailor the type of conditioning work that you're doing to like the athletes that you have in the sports they compete in, you know. So obviously for track, doing something that is a little bit more explosive and reactive and bouncy in nature makes sense. Doing a strength circuit, like I can see myself, like actually programming a strength circuit on like an easier day, or um,
And maybe it's
we,
isolation stuff that you would be doing with your power lifters on other days,
yeah, it could be, yeah, for
but
sure.
you circuit some of that isolation work together.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then you get, like, who knows, there's a bunch of different ways you could do it. But like you said,
Yeah.
it opens your mind to thinking about it differently.
Yeah. Cause like the aerobic side of it is really just like essentially it is a work to rest ratio, or like a time and intensity that you're doing stuff, but the activity that you're doing can be anything.
Exactly.
Um,
Well, we
yeah,
talked, the heart is dumb. The heart and the vessels are dumb,
yeah,
and they don't know what you're doing. It just knows, I need to pump out at this heart rate X number of blood,
yeah.
or
And
X number
it's
of milliliters of blood, whatever.
and it's
And
helpful to know too, like what kind of adaptations you're going after. Like we talked about, like, a bunch of different things that you can hope to accomplish with this type of training in the last episode. So if you are going after like the blood vessel, the heart, the blood adaptations, then it doesn't matter. Like as long as you are elevating your heart rate, then you're doing it. If you want to go after some of the muscular adaptations, then you have to be a little bit more specific. If you
get to the
want,
movements and things like that.
yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And some of the like metabolite clearance things, then the intensity matters a little bit more. Um, but if you know what you're trying to do, then you can be a lot more specific or free with what you're attempting to select. So that's good to keep in mind for sure. um but
But yeah,
yeah.
it's a really good book. I would recommend, if you know somebody who has it, borrow it. You know, if you see it on
Mhm.
the shelf somewhere in Chapters or Indigo or whatever they're called now, then like buy it.
Yeah,
It's worth it. It's worth it.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I definitely will have to give that one a read. But that doing a strength circuit, so we were talking about potentially having a conversation on training around a female hormonal cycle,
Mm.
with a guest that, I mean, I won't say her name until like it's confirmed that we're going to do it. But um, so I listened to a podcast where she was explaining the like essentially what to do at different times of the cycle. And it's like if your period is day one, It's like around day 8 or 10 or something like that, that testosterone peaks. So that's around the time where you want to be doing the heavy strength stuff, or the like more plyometric stuff, like the like higher intensity stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say higher like output movements.
Yeah. And
Okay.
then testosterone starts to come down. And I don't remember it all super, super well, but progesterone comes up, and then you feel like more relaxed, but also like more like less energy. And so that's not the time to be doing heavy strength stuff, essentially. So then she recommends doing more like cardio based stuff, more like aerobic, or and then there's certain times where you're more or less social, so like maybe doing like a fitness class or something with a bunch of other people. um so anyway, then like as I was thinking about trying to apply that to um like powerlifters or sprinters, we were talking about that before. um is there aerobic stuff that would make a meaningful contribution to their training? And as we're talking to, yes, like it is a meaningful contribution. It's not necessarily as important as like the sprinting or the heavy lifting that you're going to do, but doing, like, I can see myself at those points doing more like, maybe it's not going to be a strength circuit for a power lifter, but maybe it's more like, it's like squats, EMOM kind of. You're doing a bunch of sets, the weight's low, and the reps are low too, but you're doing like, 3 or 4 reps like every minute on the minute for like 10 minutes, whatever. And it's more of an aerobic stimulus than like than an anaerobic stimulus, something in that direction anyway, I think would make sense. Um, and she was explaining on the podcast too that I think it was the States national soccer team, maybe like women's soccer team, or it was some country's women's national soccer team that for 6 months prior to Worlds or Olympics or whatever were like training, like doing their strength and conditioning work around this hormonal cycle, in this way where you're doing like high intensity stuff some weeks and then lower intensity stuff other weeks. And they had a tremendous amount of success apparently, and ended up winning. So whoever won the most recent championship or something.
Wasn't that Canada? Didn't
Ooh,
the women's
it,
team won gold at the Olympics?
yeah, they did. So I don't think it was the Olympics then, but
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
All right.
I'm not sure, but I think it was the States. I could be wrong,
I mean,
but
they're a good team.
yeah.
So that
Um,
would check out from that standpoint of the team had success. That
yeah.
would make
So
sense.
they had success in there. So um, something like that for female athletes specifically could be a good consideration as well.
Well, yeah, and again, it brings in, again, we didn't really touch on that element leading up to this
No,
episode.
not at all.
Again, it's another factor that plays into like the hormonal system.
Yeah.
Feeds into that. It plays into, you know, your aerobic ability. So it does make sense that, yeah, why not you, if you have those markers or you have something to suggest, hey, you're up, you're down, you're wherever, match the training to what you can get done. And so again, yeah, like that's another element. Like I said, we didn't touch on it explicitly because that wasn't, what we talked about with the aerobic system leading up to this, but it makes sense because like you said, it has a direct impact on your output, your ability, what the aerobic system, what the anaerobic system is going to be capable of doing. So yeah, if you have markers to indicate you're up or down, or you should train this way or that way, why not take advantage of it? Because you're probably going to
Yeah.
maximize that training anyway.
Yeah. 100%. Like it doesn't make sense to like plan those things, or like you have to have a reasonable understanding of how you want to do it. Because it's like, for me, thinking about like everybody in powerlifting trains on a weekly basis. So thinking about training on a monthly basis is a little bit daunting because I don't really know how to do it. But learning more about that is helpful because you're trying to help people as much as you can, right? So
Well, I mean, one idea I have off the top of my head is we did talk a little bit about, we've talked about it in past series and we talked about it in this one, but that the classic study from Isserin and colleagues on the resiliency of qualities.
Yeah.
And so you could potentially create a monthly training block around that, where if you know that once you've developed maximal strength, it's 30 plus minus 5 days aerobic development. Now, mind you, this was all done on elite Russian athletes who were probably consuming vitamins. So maybe you need to scale some of those numbers back. But at the end of the day, it gives you an idea of where, like, okay, if I was going to roll on a 28-day training cycle, okay, if I got 2 max strength days in there, I probably maintain my strength. If I got 2 aerobic days in there, I probably touch on the aerobic system. I maybe need to have a little bit more speed stuff in there because that quality is more sensitive. You might be able to roll on something like that. Like every 5 days, I need to get a speed day. Every 10 days, I need a strength day. Every 15 days, I need an aerobic day. You could potentially do something like that. And one of the other interesting things that came out of Ultimate MMA, which I think relates to this, is Joel Jamieson talks about, being able to use technical work as a means of aerobic development. And so there's lighter intensity sparring or rolling or combat movements he was able to use to work into that development, which what you're talking about here with the cycle might work well too, where does the sport coach have an inventory of higher and lower intensity technical drills? And maybe that makes sense on days where we need to be lower intensity. Yeah, there's more aerobic development. The skills are not as challenging and they can, do more continuous volume work with their technical skills, whether it's, you're talking soccer, maybe that's passing, it's positioning, that type of stuff compared to like competitive, 4-on-5 or 5-on-6, like mimicking playing defense or offense against an opponent, or like full field things where you're going to have to open up and sprint or whatever. Like there's the opportunity to train the aerobic system and train it differently, like you said, with high and low intensities with sport skill as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Then like a number of these papers we're touching on, and that's like I keep talking about the interval work because I think it makes a lot of sense to do it in that fashion rather than the steady state. And actually, I was going to say this earlier when you're talking about you do some tempo work and then kettlebell swings and then some throws and then back to some tempo stuff, which like it's continuous, but it's so much more fresh than going for a 25-minute jog. So big
awful.
Would recommend doing it more in that vein. But the interval work, you can like as we talked about in the second episode, the second part of the series, it's essentially like time of the work that you're doing times the intensity of that work is what will result in the adaptation. So you can do more intense work for less time or less intense work for more time and get the same results essentially. And like we said, the metabolite and like muscular adaptations are going to be a little bit more sensitive to the intensity. So, but in terms of like the central response, it'll be similar.
Yes.
So if you care about the central response, it doesn't matter. But if you care about the peripheral response, then it does. But anyway, doing more work or the same amount of work in less time is valuable for everybody. I feel sport coaches like that stuff because then they have more time to practice sport. And then you can also do low level skills as part of your recovery in between the intervals as well. So if you're dedicating 15 minutes of your practice time to doing some energy systems development, while you're only actually doing real work for maybe 5 of those 15 minutes, that's like an extra 10 minutes within the conditioning that you can do sport skills, and potentially an extra 15 minutes before the conditioning where you can do sport skills that you're not just going for a half-hour run, So I think that kind of a thing makes sense from that perspective as well. And then also there's papers on like setting up like small sided games or larger sided games just to it gives you the same stimulus and you can manipulate, the size of the field, the number of players on one side or the other side, or I don't remember if there was any studies talking about like using two balls instead of one or something like that. Probably not. That seems like it'd be dangerous, but there's a number of things you can change, and then the same with like you can do work to rest ratio intervals with those things as well, and it's equally as effective as just running, but it's more fun and easier buy-in from the athletes and sports coaches probably.
Well, and that goes back to the point, like when I have here starred like 100 times and question marks everywhere, like what's actually the value of conditioning? And I don't mean the value of developing your aerobic or anaerobic systems to be prepared to play your sport. I mean the value of like traditional conditioning where we think of, running back and forth on the line or going for a 20-minute jog or riding the bike for an hour. Like what actually is the value of that? If like what you just explained, if you can get it through the sport, depending on your scenario, maybe it's not that important. Right now, as we're recording, we're in the middle of another shutdown. At least our province is. And I know most of the country is dealing with mostly the same thing. Some provinces aren't, but that traditional conditioning maybe takes a little bit more precedence right now because we don't have access to being in our sport facilities, playing sports, playing the games, doing that type of thing. So we need to do something to keep the systems ready to rock. But if you have access to doing that stuff, then if you have that, like you said, the small sided games, practice your skill development set up in an intelligent way, you can get the energy system development you're looking for. So, example, like when we were working with basketball Waterloo in the off season, we saw them 3 times a week to lift. They were down on the court 2 or 3 days a week doing runs. Mm-hmm. Like they were playing 5-on-5, they were scrimmaging, they were just doing, it was unstructured. It was, it wasn't like a dedicated practice like it was in season where you're practicing systems and going over plays and whatever, but it was unstructured scrimmaging 2 to 3 times a week. Well, they're going out there, they're running around, they're playing the exact basketball work to rest ratios because they're scrimmaging. Mm-hmm. So was it worthwhile for us to take any of those 3 days we had them in the weight room to do more of what they were already doing? Well, probably not. Right? Now, if they weren't out there 2 or 3 times a week, we probably need to find some time to do some conditioning and make sure they're prepared to hit the court again when they're going back. So I think it obviously always depends on your scenario, but I think like what you talked about with some of the small sided games and the benefits of sport practice, you really, I think, have to take a look at your environment, your surroundings, and what you're in to decide, like, is it worth to have dedicated conditioning time? Because if it's already being worked into something else, then don't waste your time on it. But if it's not, then you obviously need to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, and like just imagining the difference between like the different stimuli you can get from like changing some of those factors. Like if you're talking about basketball, imagine playing full court 3-on-3 where you have like 1 minute on the clock and whoever has the most points scored in 1 minute, like they win. You have to go. It's going to be full court sprints back and forth.
And the ground you're covering is going to be way higher.
Exactly. Compared to like, imagine you're playing like half court 5-on-5 for like 20 minutes straight. Just check at the top. There's no whistles, you keep going, and that's a very aerobic stimulus all of a sudden. So there's a lot of change you can do. And like playing basketball is great because then you're developing everything exactly you need to do for that sport. But having exposures on either side of that stimulus is going to be valuable as well. And one paper that I came across was talking about a fatigue index, which I think is a really valuable tool potentially to assess some of this stuff. Like if you're not doing any aerobic work, then you need to do some aerobic work. We know that. But if you are doing some, how do you know which athletes need more, which athletes need less? And for me anyway, thinking about a fatigue index makes sense. So you just pick whatever activity. This one was talking about sprints, repeated sprints, and you compare your fastest sprint to your average sprint, essentially. Like it's more of a complex formula than that, but
You're looking
it's
at the drop off effectively.
yeah, it's that ratio. Um, and I imagine if the ratio is very close to your top end, then you want to focus more on the top end. Um, and if the average is way far below your top end, then you want to do more conditioning work, probably. And for any sport like basketball, soccer, um, football, hockey, even to an extent, like doing sprint stuff makes sense. But I imagine you could apply it to any activity, and just like you could do it like biking would be easy, or you could, have people jumping on force plates or throwing a med ball at a force plate or something like that, and just seeing the peak force compared to the average force. And you'd still get a similar kind of idea. You'd have to adjust the formula, obviously. But um, yeah, I think that could be a really valuable tool to use as well.
Yeah, like you said, the fatigue index is, I mean, it's in a number of different tests, and there's a lot of sport specific tests too that look at that type of stuff. I know there's one for rugby where you have to like get up and then run and then get down and then get up and then run, and it's mimicking the getting up and getting down. So there are some versions of that where, like you said, there's this drop off or this fatigue index that's associated with it, but it looks different based on, I know there's one for hockey where they're skating.
Yep.
And they bring the timing gates out onto the ice. And then they look at, your skating speed and things like that. And there's like obviously the repeat sprint one that you mentioned, where you do like 6 30-meter sprints. And what's your fastest, what's your slowest, what's your average? So yeah, like it's one of those things where, how creative do you want to get with it? How well do you know your environment that you can create something that, is relevant to what you're actually doing? And I think that's, probably the most important thing, because everyone's environment is going to be a little bit different. Not everyone's dealing with the same resources, same team, same sport. All that stuff is different. So, the more that you can adapt it to your specific environment, the better it's going to be. Because there's really no right or wrong. There's just what's working better and working worse within your context.
Yeah, absolutely. There was one kind of weird idea that I had. That's not super related to what we we're just talking about, but
Doesn't matter.
there was one paper that I read. It was about the interference of strength and aerobic training. And they did a number of different tests. And essentially, if you focus on strength, you can build strength and maintain everything else, except like sprint and jump performance do tend to go up as strength goes up, which is valuable. But strength training was enough to maintain endurance performance. And endurance training was enough to maintain speed and jump performance, and strength as well.
Interesting. I wouldn't have thought that.
Yeah. And then I don't remember. I think the subjects were athletes, because I was coming across a number of papers that had just normal people as their subjects. And I was like, nah, I don't care about this. Moving on. So I think it was athletes. I don't remember what kind of athletes it was. But then they were talking about too, with the endurance training, it affected like squat performance. Or sorry, no, this was a different paper. Doing strength training concurrently with aerobic training, squat performance didn't really go up that much, but bench press performance went up, not as much as it did with like strength training by itself, but still like a really significant amount. So to me, that means that the interference is local. So if you're running, then you're not going to be able to squat as well, but you'll be able to bench better. Comparatively, if your aerobic training is like an arm cycle ergometer or something like that.
Those are brutal, by the way.
Yeah, or like the ski machine or something.
Yeah.
then you could probably still improve your squatting to a pretty reasonable degree. So to me, if you care a lot about the like central adaptations and don't care as much about like the muscular adaptations to endurance training, then you could like have a one block that's like upper body, speed, strength, power, with lower body conditioning, and then vice versa, like 2 blocks later or something like that.
Well, yeah, it'd be a work around the potential local interference that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, I
So,
think that highlights why it's important. Like you said, do you understand? Are you going after a central adaptation, or are you going after a local adaptation, or is it a combination of both?
yeah.
Because it will influence potentially what you do
Mm-hmm.
in your training.
Yeah.
And that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because you're not doing it that way, then like you said, you may end up with an unintended consequence of, oh, I thought squat was going to go up more, or I thought I was going to be running faster, jumping higher, or whatever it is. And it may not happen because then you didn't account for potential local interference.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, and I guess the take home is just you got to understand that the adaptations and your sport and what are you trying to improve? You know, what is everything you want to improve, and then how can you make it work for you with like selecting the appropriate activities and appropriate intensities and whatnot.
Yeah. And that's all, like, that's not just aerobic training. That's probably every training topic we've discussed.
Yeah.
Works the exact same way. You need to know what you're going after and why you're going after it.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you understand that, then it's a lot easier to let the building blocks, put them into place, and, know that you're probably, we never know for sure, but you're giving yourself a good chance, or that it's probable you're going to get the outcome that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the only other thing that I wanted to say anyway was that we've touched on it, like saying that the intensity matters, but I think there is value in treating it similar to other activities as well, where you are, like, generally speaking, increasing the intensity throughout the off season. Just because like there's value in all levels of the intensity. And there's certain attributes that respond better to more intensity. And then that way it's just like, it's a progressive stimulus, like if, I don't know, I haven't seen the research on it, but I can imagine if you do a lot of high intensity interval work, going back to doing steady state exercise at 60% VO2 is not going to be as potent as if you started there. If you started at 60% and then built up to like you're doing 80% continuous, and then you're getting into like 85, 90, 95 interval work, and then pushing into like the 130% interval work, I imagine that would make you'd get a lot more out of each stage. At least in my head, that makes sense. And that's similar to like how you would periodize any other attribute, essentially.
Well, to me, they're also different, that I don't
Yeah.
actually know. Like if I was doing interval work at 95%, I'd probably feel pretty trash going
Yeah.
back to doing the continuous work at 60, because it's just not what I'm prepared for.
Well,
So then I still
there's
think you
that
would
as
adapt and
well.
you would get that stimulus. You know what I mean? Like that's the I
I
guess
guess
the
I'm
thought that I
thinking
have
about
there,
it.
it's specific to different things. So
I'm thinking about it more from the central adaptation. For sure, the peripheral is going to be completely different. Like how the muscles are going to adapt because you're using different fiber types. You're like accruing, different levels of metabolites and things like that. But if we're just talking about the like the adaptations at the heart and at the blood vessels, like you're going from like essentially like
like a high to low.
yeah, like a moderate intensity volume
Yeah.
to like a lower volume, higher intensity. But yeah, like for sure, the adaptations at the muscles and stuff are going to be different. So it could be, yeah, equally as beneficial depending on when you do it. And if you're going to do like steady state running, you need to be prepared for that amount of like ground contact, and things like that too. But Yeah.
But yeah, it just goes to show, I think there's so many different ways you can do this.
Yeah. 100%.
And
So get creative.
yeah, exactly. Get creative. And we know that the aerobic system is important. We know there's benefit to having some of it in there. Yes, an endurance athlete is going to need way more of it than a team sport or speed power athlete, depending on what they're doing. Absolutely. But I think there's enough ways that we can implement this in a creative way where, yeah, if you need it 3 or 4 times a week, here it is. But if you just need to have it in there once a week to get, your minimum effective dosage to improve on it and have the aerobic system where it needs to be,
Yeah.
then you have options as well. So I think that's,
Yeah.
don't overlook it and don't just exclude it because we think of sport, team sport and speed power sports as being all about that, and that there's no aerobic or fitness, air quotations, fitness, contributions that are being made.
Yeah.
Because I know
Yeah.
I've thought that way before. Don't worry about the aerobic system. It doesn't actually matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely don't ignore it. But also if it's not like a major part of your sport, like don't spend too much time stressing about it. Just try to
Exactly.
like find a way to make it, enjoyable for the athletes. Find a way to do other things with that time as well. If you can work on support skills as we're talking about, or um, work on like more of the elasticity piece or strength piece or hypertrophy piece or whatever, something that's also beneficial for your sport with that time, then it's like anything else. You have a finite amount of time and adaptation quality, so you want to like select the most appropriate things to be doing with that time. You don't want
Optimize
to
it.
like exactly, like you don't want to have this, like I have one exercise for strength, I have one exercise for speed, I have one exercise for power, I have one exercise for endurance. Like you want to, if you can do more things with less stuff, then do it for sure. Yeah, and I mean an important part of making, especially if you're going for a long run, to make that enjoyable, you want to have some good tunes that you're playing.
I don't know how you could do without it.
Yeah, or even
Man, I'm going for 20 or 25-minute jogs right now once a week, and I hate them.
You should break them down into some more friendly intervals.
Not yet. Almost
Okay.
there.
All right. Yeah, so what are you listening to on your runs or otherwise?
Well, I haven't been listening to this on my runs, but I wanted to share. I've been listening to I guess it's one person. I was about to say a band, but I guess one person's on a composer, whatever, musical artist. Starcadian.
Interesting.
Yeah, super groovy, super catchy, kind of synth wave. They're actually listed as like a film composer.
Okay.
Because they make ear movies.
Oh, that's an interesting name.
You know what I mean? Like, and it's kind of true because they're in that synth wave stuff, but apparently they do produce films and they do, writing and other things like that. They're just an artist, it appears. But yeah, just really kind of like 80s sounding, but has funk elements in it, but it sounds like it's from the future, but it has this retro feel to it. Like, it's just a lot of really kind of catchy songs and a lot of like atmospheric songs that almost tell a story. And I think it's because I didn't realize this until I watched a documentary on it the other day, but a lot of synthwave artists like have a background in filmmaking.
Oh, interesting.
Because when you're first starting out, you have to learn how to do everything. So how to do camera, how to create the story, how to edit the film, and you also have to compose music and the soundtracks that go in, because you can't afford to hire a composer because you're on a one-person budget. So there's a lot of synthwave artists that started out in film and then stayed in music and became like composers for creating music that you hear in movies and as backing tracks and things like that. So, but yeah, the stuff is like super groovy, super catchy. Like 100% you will dance, you will sing along. Like, it's impossible not to with some of it. So, and a wide range, like really different stuff. Like I said, some of it really funky, really catchy. You're going to be dancing and singing. Other songs like no lyrics at all,
Mm.
and just atmospheric, and it sounds like it belongs in a movie and it's telling a story. Just really cool stuff. So I've been jamming out to a lot of Starcadian recently.
Yeah, that sounds like it'd be a fun thing to check out for sure. A lot to suit different moods, different
It's a roller
intensities.
coaster ride.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
Very cool.
What about you? What are you listening to as you go on your 20-minute runs?
I'm not doing any 20-minute
Yeah, I
runs,
know.
I'll tell you that.
I know.
I so I can't remember what I think the last one I shared was Lil Nas X. So I don't listen to a lot.
That was the last one.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. We talked before the show that I don't have a lot of time to listen to stuff lately. So I try to keep it, so that I can share a new thing every episode. But my brother told me a while ago about the Longest Johns, who I have mentioned on the show before.
Yeah.
Because I found them, I told him, and then he told me when they had a new album called their Land Shanties album, because they are a sea shanties group. And then they wrote 7 songs, and it's in an album. They're land shanties, so it's instead of a ship, it's a car. Instead of the sea, it's a road. And they are so funny. They're phenomenal, and like they sound great too. Like it's really well produced, really well done. Their voices are great, but just the content is hilarious.
Even just the concept, though, we're gonna make a land shanty and talk about driving the car on the road as opposed to the boat on the sea. It's like even just the clever humor behind that is like, I appreciate that.
It's fantastic. So they've got a song about getting drive through. They've got a song about running out of gas. They got a song about when you see another driver of the same car model as yours.
Oh no.
They've got one for like ignoring what the GPS says. Like it's so it's so good. They've got one for like when you're trying to find a parking space close to the store and you don't want to like get one that's far away from like at the back of the parking lot.
Yeah.
Right in front of the store. Yeah,
it's all relatable things though.
It's so relatable. Yeah, it's
hopefully
fantastic.
not the running out of gas one, but
no, but it's just so like dramatic too. You know how sea shanties are, like everything's so epic.
Yeah, it's like high energy, like things are up there.
It's the same tone, like it's really just, it's incredible. If you like funny songs, like comedic songs, then check it out for sure. It's great.
Content. I mean, I'm a car guy. I want to listen now.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a good time listening to those for sure.
That's a good pick, man. I like that one.
Yeah, would recommend. Yeah, so that concludes another series. That was fun.
Yeah.
Painless, I would say.
A lot less painful than I thought it was going to be. I did not want to do aerobic. I did not even want to touch this topic. I was like, I don't even want to talk about this for 30 seconds. And we got 3 episodes out of it.
Yeah, so we talked about it for 3 hours. Yeah. So if anybody has any ideas for our next series or other topics that we should cover, let us know. Speed Strength Show, Speed Strength Performance, Braden Southern, Directed Strength. And yeah, until then, thanks for coming along, world. That was the Speed Strength Show.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.